Good morning. It is Thursday, July 6th. My name is Krystin Anderson. I'm here on behalf of the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program just outside of Atlanta at the lovely home of
Tina Dunkley.
Good morning. Thank you for being here with us. Can you tell us your date and place of birth?
Brooklyn, East New York, Brooklyn, February 16, 1951.
All right. Awesome. And could you tell us a little bit about your childhood, your upbringing?
I was raised in a family of, I had two siblings, two male siblings, several years my senior, Kenneth and Ernest and Kenneth, Ernest first. And they're 12, 13 years my senior, so I was really pretty much a young girl in a home that with a busy mother and a merchant marine father who was devout in returning every 21 days for 2 days. Okay, and Christmas holidays. So the family I grew up in, Trinidadian. My mother's from Trinidad, my father's from Jamaica. So it was very Caribbean oriented in terms of holidays and with aunts and uncles and cousins. But it was also a solid Jewish community. So we were tokens within that community. The education system, very much so. The stores, the commercial stores, all very much a Jewish community.
So it was a Jewish community. What was your family's religious persuasion?
Catholic. We were raised as Catholics. Probably in my teenage years, I lost faith based on an interaction with a priest that somehow thought that I had something to confess that I did not, in terms of confession that precedes communion. And he was very insistent that I had done something risque at 14, and I was very insistent that I hadn't. And at the point that I told him that I was involved in dance by that time with Catherine Dunham's school up in Manhattan at her studio. And when he asked me to return to religious instructions, and I told him that it was on a day that I was dancing, he said, well, I can't forgive you for your sins, which I didn't think I had. So that was a moment in my young mind where I was like, this is really strange. We have to leave this alone. So, but yeah, I continued. I mean, in terms of a practice, but not specifically with Catholicism.
Okay, got you. So you mentioned a Caribbean background. What race and identity do you describe yourself as? Any that you find important?
So that's an interesting question for now, because I have Afro-Atlantic. That's how I describe myself. And a person of African descent. I'm African American, one could say that, but I'm at this stage, I made a decision this year that is going to be Afro-Atlantic, in recognition of all of the people that came from the continent and were placed in South America, Central America, the Caribbean, and North America, and then just given all of the information that I have come into relative to my family, definitely Afro-Atlantic. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, for the record, my name is Donovan Carter, also with the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program. You mentioned your kind of Caribbean home in Brooklyn. So can you tell me more about maybe what types of foods you ate at home? What was your maybe favorite meal growing up?
Ooh, I love that question. I like that question. And I like that question because I was a child that, first of all, I know I'm going to answer that question. I need to say this before I forget. And that's that this family, my family was a very creative family. So aunts and uncles painted, they sewed, tailored. My mother owned a beauty salon. So she was a hairdresser and a seamstress. My aunt sewed for Krystin Dior. So people were always making things. My brother he was building planes and photography. So it was a rich environment that way. But to go back to your question about the food, I remember being a child that really did not like the moment of mealtime. I didn't like to eat, didn't want to eat, and it was not a good thing except for callaloo. Now, callaloo and crabs on the Trinidadian side now, which I still stay amazed at this because I don't really understand how a child that really doesn't want to eat can't stand green peas and carrots, all this, couldn't say. But when my mother told me that my aunt made a pot of callaloo, which consisted, for those who don't know, and callaloo and crabs, because this is a time when you really couldn't get the actual bush in the country. So they used spinach along with the okra, coconut milk, all the seasonings, the garlic, the onions, and then there was pigtails in there, but the binding flavor was the juice from those crabs, the blue crabs. And my aunt used to kill them live. So she, it was a whole part. They went into the pot clean. So there was a whole process. And somehow, as slimy as that thing was, I thought it was heaven. I couldn't get enough. And I remember being really young, liking that. And as I look back, I'm just like, how does a person that doesn't want to eat anything be in love with such a, what shall we call that dish? It's quite, it's robust, and its flavor and its texture. So yeah, a lot of people wouldn't eat it now, but I can never get enough.
It's good stuff. So how did growing up in New York impact your identity and your sense of self, culturally, as an artist, as a woman in general?
It's so nice to be at this stage of my life to be able to look back and really understand that. But I have to say it was a great fortune, a great fortune of cultural exposure, in terms of, first my family, you take that all for granted, but the school systems I went to, which were basically administrated by Jewish people who had a real strong interest in culture as a whole. So that city is really seated in that, as well as African Americans. And so I was taking, I had piano lessons going on with my aunt, Aunt Eileen. I'm sure they have them up there. And then, so I was studying classical music, and I was taking printmaking courses at Pratt Institute. This is all junior high school. And I think maybe even elementary school, I took something at the Brooklyn Museum. And so a painting course there at the Brooklyn Museum. So there was all of that going on, so that by the time I applied to go to high school, and I applied and was accepted to the High School of Music and Art, the LaGuardia High School of Music and Art, now situated at Lincoln Center, but at the time, I don't know how they gave up this incredible architectural, beautifully built building. It's built, it's on the campus of CCNY up on 135th Street and Convent Avenue, and it's built in the form of a castle, overlooking the rivers, and I lived way on the other side of New York City, in East New York, Brooklyn. So the journey was at least an hour and 15, 20 minutes from start to finish, going to and then back from. But it was an experience that I'm still living today. Can you imagine that I'm still living that today? Because the people that attended that school, we remained like this. I graduated in '69, and that was during the central era of the civil rights movement. So we were protesting at that school for a curriculum that had African American studies and all the. So we really, and that bond that we created in that time, we are still very much connected in our lives today. I go to New York for different events, and we don't wait for the cycle of 5 years. Every 5 years.
That's awesome. That's beautiful to still have that connection. So where else have you lived? Where did you move after New York?
So I applied Lincoln University, and I just went to their 50. So I went for the first year of undergrad school. I applied to Lincoln, and myself and 3 other girlfriends from 10th grade, we all went to Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. And that was really an experience, stepping outside of a city like New York and going into a rural area with Amish and KKK territory, because we were actually forced to leave that institution. We got an announcement on one day in 1970, right before our finals, that we had to be off the campus by sundown. And my mother and my father was in Jamaica at the time, he was away, so she had to drive down with another friend from New York to Philadelphia to get us, pack up, and get out of there by sundown. 1970. I did not return to the school, not singularly because of that, but because I accepted a proposal from my boyfriend, became my fiance, and he was like, well, you need to come back to New York anyway. And that's how I ended up going to the school that he was at. I followed suit. I didn't do the research. He was at the School of Visual Arts, and I went to the School of Visual Arts to be with my fiance. And I completed that curriculum and got a Bachelor's of Fine Arts in sculpture and painting. And we did not get married.
Wow, that's quite an incredible story. So I want to kind of touch back about your time at Lincoln. I know a little bit about Lincoln University. I know it's considered by many to be like one of the first historically black college universities. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Was it your first time really out of the city, out of New York?
No, because I was in and out. Let me think about this. In terms of the nation, domestically, we'd probably gone to Boston, but I mean, I'd been out of the country by then. By that time, I'd already been to Mexico, and we were in and out of Jamaica and Trinidad. So I mean, it wasn't like my first time out of New York, but into the interior of USA, one could say yes. Mm.
Okay.
But go ahead. What was the rest of that question? Yeah. What was going on at Lincoln?
Yeah.
Gil Scott Heron, Sun Ra. Oh, it was going on. We had.
Yeah.
Me and let's see, my dear classmates, Ellen DeLeston, Terry Wisdom, Vicky, and Teresa Campbell Hoover. We were what do they call them? The entourage of Gil Scott Heron, following him around when he was writing the music of "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised," with Brian Jackson as his accompanist. piano there. And we were in and out of New Jersey when he was performing these songs. And Dick Gregory, I think there's and really, we'd have to talk to my roommate, Terry Wisdom, who's has a channel, Harlem Network News. She's the journalist, and founder of Harlem Network News now. But she's the one that remembers all of the incredible. The only reason why I'm even able to say this now is because they just had their 50th anniversary, which I went to here in was it May, and such a lot of wonderful people that I hadn't seen in decades, and yeah, so there was a lot of. But what was difficult for me, to be quite honest, was being in that environment, and I didn't realize that it did cause a depression, because I'm not sure what it was. You know, I mean, I was young, but I remember it seemed like I could never get enough sleep, and I was sleeping in between classes, which couldn't have been more than 15 minutes, you know, which was nuts, you know. So I don't know what, but it was a good time, and I still have friends, beloved friends from that period of time too. So yeah.
Very cool. So,
am I answering? Are the answers too long?
No, this is great.
Okay,
This is great.
Wonderful. I also saw that you were part of the Cultural Olympiad of 1996.
Yes.
All
Yes,
right.
yes.
All right. So by this time, you were coming to Atlanta. How would you kind of compare the cultural experiences with being in New York, being in Pennsylvania, coming to Atlanta?
Well, let me just say this, because I'm not to redirect your question, but maybe to give it more context, I think. I was showing Sherry a little while ago, right behind you, and that should be here, because to me this is a major moment. That if you grab that New York Times article is a pivotal moment in my life. The New York Times article from April 1974, and this is the Sunday issue, where it says at the bottom, "Atlanta, town of black is bountiful." That article, and as you can see, Zenona Clayton, who was just received that wonderful honor in sculpture, she's in the middle of this. But the point is, I read this article, and I knew I had to come to this city. That was it for me. Here I am in my last year of undergrad, and I was like, there was like a 8-page spread with Mayor Maynard Jackson and all of this. I was just like, wow, this is going on. I got to get there. What I didn't realize until a decade or so ago, I always thought that when I read this article, it took me 6 months to put this together to get here. It turns out I was here, well, right after I read the article, I ended up moving here within 60 days, with a trip in between to determine whether I could come. That still, and this goes to the point of, must have had a purpose, because I came down here for 4 days on a spring break, not knowing anything about the city. A friend of a friend let me stay at their home. I realized very quickly in the first 24 hours that I was insane, that I could not make the decisions that I had to make. I wasn't even looking for a job in the arts, because my ignorance was Atlanta, the South, they probably don't even know how to spell art. So that's how I came in. And I realized very quickly that I was off, and asked this person to take me back to the airport. And I said, well, this is crazy. I can't do this in 4 days. There's no transportation. I was sitting at the bus stop, and they said to me, well, look, you're here now. You have 4 days. You might as well stay. So I stayed, and they gave me their car to drive. And in the midst of driving that car around the city, on the radio comes an announcement that the city of Atlanta is looking for artists who major in sculpture, who to build creative playgrounds in these communities. And I pulled the car up, I had a map, there's no GPS, got the location, this is off the radio, in the car. And I go down there and I apply, and they were like, oh, okay, well, come back in 2 weeks for an interview. I said, I can't come back in 2 weeks, so they sent me to the interview. Long story short, the job began 4 days after I graduated. I was down here and working in the arts in my field.
Wow.
That's how that happened. That's 1974. What followed next was the Atlanta Alliance Theater, Children's Theater, doing scenic painting. That's an amazing story too. I won't get into it, but I did. That was kind of shocking, but it was wonderful, and I did it. And then the next was the Neighborhood Arts Center. The Neighborhood Arts Center was on Georgia Avenue, where people like, this is where I met Samuel L. Jackson, because we were the first crew of artists. I was in the crafts area for the community. He was teaching theater, and there was a whole slew of wonderful people in the arts. And I was there from 75 to 77 when I made the decision that I needed to go back to school and get another degree. But I didn't want to get a degree in the fine arts, which I kind of regret because I really do like teaching. I got it in African American Studies, which I don't regret. So, and I ended up meeting the gentleman who knew that I'm at a class in his home, and the gentleman in the middle of that New York Times article, I meet him 4 years later, 4 or 5 years later, and I'm in his class. And it's the African American Studies program. Yeah, that's how it. Now, you're trying to get to the Olympics, which is several decades later.
No, whatever.
But that to me those are real pivotal moments in my career. I just never thought for 1 minute that any of that would evolve into the War of 1812. And African Americans' role in that. So yeah, it's yeah.
Well, awesome. So you mentioned the War of 1812, so we're going to pivot to that in a second. But first,
I didn't answer about the Olympics.
oh yes.
But I just needed to give you that background. But the Olympics, by this time when the Olympics came, and I was enrolled at the time in the doctoral program, which I didn't finish, in International Affairs and Development at Clark Atlanta University. And I was actually had a Kellogg Fellowship in International Development that took me into Brazil through Partners of the Americas. And so I was actually spending quite a bit of time in Brazil and in the hemisphere with this program. And got very much involved in Afro-Brazilian culture, and which I still love. And actually, all of that kind of led to the War of 1812. It was really there's all of these amazing ties because of how I got involved in it. But so I was invited to produce a program for the Olympics, and in that period. And I agreed, and I want to put on record that I said, well, Tina, we want you to do the Black experience and profile the communities of Martin Luther King Jr. District and the Atlanta University Center. I said, and I was really excited about it, except for one thing, and that was that somehow in the midst of spending time in Brazil, I got concerned. I really did. I tend to avoid the term the Black experience and African American experience. I really don't like it. I feel that, let me clarify this too, because when I was producing for the Olympics and I realized, these people are coming in from all over the world, and we're gonna have quote unquote the Black experience in these neighborhoods, as if it just started sounding like for Blacks only, and then you have for whites only. And it had that connotation to me that I just didn't like, because from my perspective, particularly when I visit, I've seen that exhibition of lynchings, and I'm like, these are Americans having picnics and barbecues with people. How could that be the black experience when it's the American experience? How do we end up separating that? It's all part of the systemic aspect of our culture, where now we have the black experience. And anyway, the title of the project became African American Culture, an American Experience. And that's what I prefer to really think about, because we didn't have an experience all by ourselves. We had a partner. Oh, and I wouldn't call him a partner, but you know what I mean. But so I was really moving away from that because I wanted people to see the larger picture of who we really were in the context of what America is that she's still trying to run away from. But anyhow, moving right along.
Well, thank you so much for that. Like I said, we're going to move into the War of 1812 in a second, but I want to ask about your family history a little bit more first.
Sure.
So can you tell me about, you mentioned your two older brothers and your parents, and your aunt as well. Was this your maternal aunt, your paternal aunt?
Maternal.
Okay. And you said your mom's family was from Trinidad, and your father's family from Jamaica. And so who was the kind of oldest ancestor that you had the pleasure of meeting? Perhaps a great-grandmother or even just
They were all
grandmother?
deceased. My grandmother, my paternal grandmother, who was from Trinidad, she died when I was, I guess, about 18 months. I was walking, I know that. Somewhere between 18 months, not more than 2 years old, because I've seen a picture with me sitting next to her, so I know that. But I really didn't know my grandparents. And my grandfather, Jamaican grandfather, my father barely knew him himself, because my grandmother left Jamaica, paternal grandmother left Jamaica in 1915, 3 years after my father was born, to come and make the better life for herself. And while my grandfather actually wanted him, my grandmother wouldn't let him go with him at that time. So he didn't really get to know his father until he was a grown man. And my grandfather, John Dunkley, 1891 and 1947 are his life dates. But my father did get to meet him before he passed, and because he was a barber in Kingston, and he made quite a bit of name for himself during his life. And who knew that this story about the War of 1812, both sides of my family actually blew up after my parents passed, because the Perez Museum in Miami and then the American Folk Art Museum in New York City produced a major exhibition of my grandfather's work. John Dunkley, Neither Day Nor Night. Who would have, I just couldn't, that was happening while the War of 1812 thing was happening. It's like, what are y'all doing on the other side of this life, man? What are y'all pushing out here? So, yeah, I lost, okay, I diverted. I'm sorry, back to what you were saying.
That's all right. So how did you learn more about your family's connection with the War of 1812? How did that realization come to pass?
So the easy answer that we didn't know. There were pieces of stories that would come from my aunt. My Aunt Elaine, who was the oldest female daughter. Well, she wasn't the oldest daughter, but she was next to the oldest. Well, actually, she was on the Williams side. But at any rate, she was the one that had, because they all left, my grandparents, maternal grandparents, left Trinidad in 1918. Between 1918 and 24, they brought all 8 of their children to the United States. So that's pretty early, first quarter of the 20th century. So that means that whatever information that they knew in terms of how they actually got there. In fact, I just had a revelation in the last couple of weeks with my brother about, I won't go, that's another, I won't diverge over there. But the point is that they apparently had information that they came originally from the United States. But that's not something that crossed over in generations. You know, the people don't talk about certain things. But my aunt knew something, because she would say, because I, to this question about the oldest people in my family, she would have been that one of those people. And I used to ask her, because she would talk about her grandparents that she remembered, because they were all kind of young when they left. When I say young, we're talking about young teenagers, you know. And she said that, I said, well, what did they say about enslavement if they were, and she would assert that they were never enslaved. And she would get angry because I would challenge her on that. And I said, well, now you do know what the history is of people like that look like us, you know. And she would get really like, I cough you, I told you we were never slaves in Trinidad, and you ask me again. And so I just ignored her. So she was not, and then there was some notion about, I don't even know where that came from. Well, we actually came from Virginia. Virginia? What, you lost your mind? Came from Virginia, you came from Trinidad. So there was that, but it didn't make sense. So how I ended up finding out was purely by happenstance in returning to the island and meeting the oldest name, which she cites, Loney, and the king, and there was a great uncle, grand uncle that she talked about by the nickname of Bukusu. And I was always intrigued by that name when she would start talking about this uncle, this brother of her grandmother. Every time she would say Bukusu, and I'm just like, what kind of language is she talking now? Because, you know, this is a sound that's outside of the lexicon of what we, so she would insist, but she'd just say he was her uncle. So the connection that I made very quickly, to jump in the terms of this storytelling, when I went to Trinidad, and after the last of the siblings, my uncles and aunts died, and I end up in a bookstore that a dear friend of mine took me to, and I see this book, the Amphi Bashana Jackson Fraternity, which is the photograph of these descendants, these people that are in the villages, the company villages, named for the 6 the companies that the colonial Marines served in. And I saw his name here under Loney, Bukusu, in type, and I'm just like, wait a minute, I never thought I would even see that name in print. And it's in print, and it's here. I knew that this was, they talk about the mother lode, this is the father lode right here. And I had made contact with a cousin there through the public directory. I mean, I was looking at the names, our family names were Williams, going back, Williams, Herbert, and Loney. Loney being the oldest. So when I went into directory, I happened to look, public directory, I looked at Loney. I didn't bother with Williams and Herbert because I knew, I said there were too many, there was that. But there were a handful of Loneys, and I called this gentleman. And it turns out he was like, oh yeah, he says, your Loneys, he says, there's one Loney that populated this island, and that's Ezekiel Loney. And that's him in this picture, Roderick Loney, and he's gone now, he's passed, gone to glory, and this is his family that I met in, I met them there in San Fernando, Trinidad, but this actually is in Florida. This photograph was taken with his nephews and daughter and wife and whatnot. And so this was the one meeting that we actually had with the larger family. So that's how I came to know the Loneys. And then, let me not forget to tell you this, because this is when it really gets interesting. So I go to the National Archives in Trinidad, in Port of Spain. And in that National Archives, once I find out that there's the existing of these descendants, African Americans' descendants there. I go and they show me this book. And this book, the Americans, because that's how they identify, and it's the creolization of the word American, free black Americans settlers in Trinidad, 1815, 1816, and I go in, and lo and behold, there's this ancestor with because this gentleman did immense research, putting where these people were picked up from, on what date, what time, when they were born. This is a generation of research. So once I found that, I emailed him, contacted him. I let him know that I was a descendant of Ezekiel Loney, who, when I contacted, he says, it was like he knew me. He says, oh, ancestor, they need to do a film about Ezekiel Loney. I said, you gotta be kidding me. He says, yeah. He says, he went through the ranks. He went in as a private, and he became a corporal and a sergeant, and he was, involved in helping the British march into Washington. So, the next thing I did was get on the next thing smoking, flying across to England, because he was in England. He had informed me that he was in his 70s, and I thought to myself, I said, I think I'm gonna go see him right now. And I went on a Christmas holiday, and he took me into the archives, and there I would see this. Can I get up and do this?
Yes, yes.
I would see, he took me to the musters, all these big books, almost as big as this. Not quite, but at least half the size. And the musters of the people who escaped, who ran off with the British. Let me see if I can point out. And my ancestor, I may not even have my ancestor on this one. I can't even remember, because I have several of these. Nellie Loney, this is the one with the women on it. This is what I love, because they have the sheets with the men and the women, and the children are separate. And they just write across the top here that they have these women. So that even though it says men's names, you'll see there's all women's names here. And in this one you have Nellie Loney, who would be my fourth or fifth great grandmother, and sister-in-laws, Saunders, because Tom Saunders had escaped with them. So when they went back, they escaped on April 18th, 1814, and then on April 22nd, Ezekiel went back to get all of these people, and some, 66 to be exact.
Wow.
And that's where this comes in, because I didn't see this till recently, and this is hard. You can't really, you might want to, this is a historic marker. So, and I need to get a real clean one, because I intend to somehow print this on the back of one of my jackets. But it says 69 slaves escaped to freedom, and it was the largest amount of enslaved people who were fortunate enough to run. That particular day that he went back, I'm understanding, because the plantation, which is called the Coratoman Plantation, and they have a wonderful website, by the way, now, where a volunteer researcher by the name of Patrick Heffernan has uploaded the names of 1,200 enslaved people that family estate held over a period of 200 years. And you can go through and look at all these names, and it turns out that my ancestor, Ezekiel Loney, his name first appears in that record, I want to say 1793. Anyway, he was 2 years old when his name first appeared. Now, he was 23 when he actually escaped, but he was on that plantation, we know, from age two. I'm still very curious to know how he got there. But even more significant was how where did his vision come from to even do what he did? Because there were so many, African Americans that fought on behalf of their enslavers. One in particular, there's a story I would love to write, would love to see made, because there are stories about the American militias coming on to the British. The British would allow them to board the ships to ask them to return the people that have run off, the freedom seekers. They're asking them to return, and they would take. There's one person by the name of Charles Ball, who these plantation owners brought with them, this enslaved person, to have him talk to those who had run off with the British, to ask them to come back to their masters. I mean, to me, that's a play, a moment in time. And so the idea for someone to even make a decision like that in the middle of a war, to me, is just, it's heavy, in terms of how do you make that decision and you know that you might die in the process. That's how valuable, your life is to you, which is no different than what Americans were fighting for just 6 years before that. So, it's really, it's all fascinating to me. I'd like to be a playwright about that, because that, to me, is a moment. And it's documented. It's there. You can read about this stuff.
Yeah. Wow. Wild. You shared this lovely historical marker with us, and it mentions that group of people who left from the Chesapeake Bay, that some settled in Trinidad and some settled in Nova Scotia.
Right.
So do you have any connections, relations?
Something I want to do that. So it's important to note that proclamation that the British issued, and it was on I should let you know, I'm getting ready to do another exhibition with a dear young cousin who's just come to me. She's a musician and studying composing, and she wants to do an exhibition with me about this whole family history. So anyway, that's an aside, but it's important. Repeat your question.
It mentions Nova Scotia.
Yeah, so the majority of the people were sent to Nova Scotia. Some 4,000, they think, somewhere. It was initially thought 35. Now they think 4,000. Who knows? Could be 5. But the point is that it's in those numbers. The majority, because they did not have to. It was about challenging the plantation owners. It wasn't really about, pure altruism as far as that's concerned, because it was a strategy to really challenge the plantation owners and to take their property and, destabilize the whole area. So the majority of them was sent to Canada and really weren't given much, they were treated as badly as we treating all these people coming up in the air now. I mean, that's just it seems to be a recurring theme in humanity and migrations and that kind of thing. So, and it doesn't help when you're the other. Right. So, yeah, most of them are there, and I have not. I've talked about it, and I would have gone this summer, but I'm trying to get through this other thing, and I need to go before it gets cold, right? So no, I'm really interested in that. What's going on there, and there's probably, who knows, there's probably family members up in there too, because I know everyone wasn't about necessarily picking up arms. They just wanted to get out of the way. And there were, I think it was in 1815, there was a group of 100 people that left that site to be transferred down to Trinidad. But most people were too scared to, I'm sure but they were too scared to take that chance to leave again, to get on a boat and go where, so they just stayed. But 100 of them took the chance, and they ended up in Trinidad is how that happened.
Wow, that's amazing. So, a couple things. First, Ezekiel Loney's story seems incredible. You mentioned how you were taught that were told that he kind of rose up in the ranks of the, British Marines. And he told us his escape date, which was April 8th? 18th, okay. Which is only shortly after the proclamation was made by the British.
That is correct. I remember, I think it was the 4th. I got it here. Yeah. I think it was like the 2nd, or maybe it was April 2nd. I think it was April 2nd. So, and I was curious to know how did they know that this was happening? This is so funny to me, because I was like, well, now wait a minute. If people can't read, and how do they know that this is happening? Well, apparently some people can read or what have you. Well, it turns out the British had distributed 1,000 of those sheets, and now the proclamations, they got it online. That's because I'm going to be generating that for some artwork. But they distributed 1,000 printed sheets out, like flyers. Now, I guess whoever could read that and conveyed it to them, and the rest is history.
Wow.
And probably because of the Chesapeake Bay being so centrally located for Maryland and Virginia, that territory, it was easy for people on those the branches off of the rivers to jump in boats and do their thing. So, but I met a family they know that this man who wrote this married a descendant from Cumberland Island, Althea McNish, who became a major textile designer in England, and the royal family purchased from her as well. So yeah, it's
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And now this kind of plantation in Virginia, in the area, Carotterman, have you been?
Yes.
Okay, what was that like?
Well, what's left on Carotterman's estate right now is the church, the Christ Church that they built in the 1700s, and who knows, probably one of my ancestors helped build that. And the National Geographic documentary that they did last year is that church is in there, in that documentary. Because only the footprints of the main house. They don't have any, a lot of that property is probably sold, and it was a massive, I think it was 600 something acres, if I'm not mistaken. It might have been more, but my memories, if I'm not talking about this, I tend to lose it. But the southerly, because where National Geo ended up recording me, was on another plantation, because that has been preserved. The cabins, at least one a cabin, and it's the I want to say southerly, if I'm saying that right, and they're in Maryland. And but the Carotterman, where it's located, it's really that church, and it's very much intact, because it's really built to last for the next couple of centuries. So it's an interesting environment, and they have a foundation where they do research or what have you. I've tried to investigate the idea of some reparations, but that door seems to be shut. But you never know.
You never know. That's right. I also want to ask about your time in Trinidad, doing your both, as a child, being there and doing your research. Firstly, what was it like being in Trinidad as a child?
Well, so I only went to before going as an adult. I only went in once and I was 12. So I was in that twilight period, and we spent. I guess we did about a good 10 days, 10 to. I mean, it could have been 2 weeks. We were there a while, and you know how unconscious you are as a young person. The thing that that I basically remember was eating roti every day for lunch. That's what I remember. That roti, I couldn't get enough of roti. And when I woke up every day, I was like, I'm gonna have roti today. And I would go to this little store and I'd get it. And that's basically what I remember. We were with family members. I remember meeting my granduncle, would have been my grandfather's brother. He was alive, and I don't remember who that is. And I've actually gone back to that territory too, because he was in Manzanilla, on the coast there. My grandfather's people, the Williams, and he was a highly educated man who taught in the school system there, and in fact financed bringing the whole entire family up to New York, Albert James Williams. And so that's what I remember from that trip. Not a whole lot. My memory wasn't that great anyway. I just apparently have a thing for food, right? Yeah.
We all do, I say. And what was it like going back for learning more about the Americans?
Well, like I said, when I went in, again, this is not a story I was looking for. It found me. And the reason why it found me was really because of that, my art. So this tape, the fact that my brother, see these things that we do, they seem so ephemeral and what have you, but then they become real large pieces. The fact that he had the idea to record my aunt, we would not have that information. It would be gone forever. But she had the name, she had the street, she had the locations. And the other thing about this particular brother, Kenneth, he's a holographer, a pioneering holographer in the world of holography. Ken Dunkley, you can look him up. And he had made this piece around that same time. And it's hanging on the wall over there. It's called, she says, picture this. It was shown at the Museum of Modern Art. Now you're looking at a photograph of a hologram of a hologram of a hologram. So they're like three contained images, three-dimensional images, three-dimensional images embedded, like what do they call those Russian dolls?
Nesting doll.
Nesting doll. Well, there's another name, but I was thinking. But anyway. So, and the idea of that was, you could see the ripples in the sand going out. There's an idea as a thought. And he called that hologram thoughts. And I told him, I said, see, we're working, we don't even understand. We think we're here on another mission, but look, you did that at the time. You had the thought to do this, to make that recording, and look, it's still rippling out. You are here. This is going to be the third recording, documentary in that sense. The first one was when the U.S. ambassador to Trinidad, because I had submitted a Fulbright proposal. Once I got the information, I submitted a proposal to go in to do the research. The U.S. ambassador was not aware that these descendants of African Americans lived there. And what I was explaining to Sherry Jackson was that their locale in history is very much parallel to the Geechee Gullah cultures of the United States, in that, we've sort of we knew these people were there, we knew they had a different kind of language, we didn't know why they spoke a little differently, but they had even the materials that they had, relative to the weaving of, basket weaving is a survival of, the West African tradition. We weren't paying any attention to any of that. The same thing was going on with Americans. So there they are in this area because they were situated far off from the then enslaved population of Trinidad on the northern side. But so by the time, people are living their lives, they're trying to survive. They're not caught up with, and they're busy trying to get educated. I mean, you think about the majority of the population was what's the word for illiterate. You had to get educated to be able to read and understand what's happening around you. So, we're coming into generations with technology and all of that stuff, and information over here and information over there. And now it's starting to coalesce. We're really starting to find out some things about, this is one story. God knows how many there are.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Wow, that's amazing. And have you been to the company villages? What was that?
For sure.
What was it like?
Yeah, so the company villages, I stand in amazement. I go there all the time. I didn't get Fulbright, by the way. That's another story. We won't go into that. It wasn't my fault because the U.S. supported me twice on that because the Trinidadian have the last word and they like to use it. So I left them alone. That's no problem. But it's going on without them anyway. But it's amazing to go in because they have. I think the thing that struck me because I ended up the U.S. ambassador personally funded the publication of this book, but the street names are still. Like the signs. Wow. First Company Village, Third Company Village, Baptist Church, Fourth Company. The signs are there. 200-some years ago. The history is there. Something, it's something to really, to see and feel and understand what, people did to really survive. And they're still struggling in the sense, because anytime you don't really have economic development at a certain level, that's why I put these people, I put these people in the book because they are very much there and alive, and they know their history. And and so now this is the wife of the gentleman that authored this book, Althea, and but they're incredible. And this is my cousin, who he's just gone to glory in the last couple of years. This is Roderick Loney. And this is the gentleman who, Augustus Lewis, who was recruited me to help them get the word out. And this is Akila Jatamogi, who's a consummate ecologist, environmentalist, has a major business in Trinidad that deals with all of the water issues and fire issues, and she knows all about nature in a very specific way. And I dare not forget that she is a leader, one of the leading people in the Maroon movement of this Western Hemisphere, the United Maroons group. So she's really she's a mover and shaker for sure. She got the energy. And this is Hazel Manning, who's the widow of one of the prime ministers of Trinidad. So these are all descendants of the Americans. So yeah.
Wow. That is a good group of people doing the work, really. Mm-hmm. So have you guys had any meetings or reunions of the descendants of the multiple companies?
They continue. In fact, they're going to have, first of all, they have a meeting, a celebration of their landing in this territory on the week of August 20th. That's when those events actually happen. I've been to one. Well, I mean, I've been to a couple of different meetings that they've held in Trinidad. I haven't been recently, because once I decided to do my exhibition, that sort of, and I was hoping to be able to do it there. That still could happen on another level. So, but yeah, they have meetings in that area. I'm not sure that I can handle Trinidad now that I'm having issues with heat. That's what I'm finding. But if I can be in water, I'm okay. But if I'm in the sun, I got issues now. I'm looking to move toward Maine. I might be living in Nova Scotia next.
Back up north, I get that. I want to ask about your art. I've seen it. I've seen images of it and pictures of it. First of all, it's amazing. Secondly, I want to ask about, you talk about your family being creative people, and you talk about having a pedigree of artists in your life, and you being involved in the arts in junior high school and elementary school, and going to music and arts high school. Can you talk about some of the perhaps key influences or inspirations of perhaps your different stages of your art? That's a big question.
Well, here's the thing about me and my art. I have not been a prolific artist, and that irks my soul. Meaning that I'm not practicing, I'm not doing art all the time. I mean, if you really want to grow like anything, you got to be doing it all the time. I'd be sketching you while you're talking to me, and there's all this stuff that needs to be happening in real time. And because I apparently am, I always thought I was a little different, and turns out it took me till I was mature to find out that I am ADD, in a sense that to hold focus is a real challenge for me, and of course it's now getting worse. And I'm all that. That's really not a problem, but it worked for me. In the sense of what I ended up becoming, which was a curator of a collection. See, this collection that I became engaged to, married, it was this Clark Atlanta collection. This book here, if I may. This took me off into another territory, because once I pursued the degree in African American Studies, I discovered this collection in the basement. This collection turned out to be the answer to the question that my professors at the School of Visual Arts could not answer, which was, they were denying the existence of African American artists, that we didn't exist. Well, and really what they really meant was that they didn't know of any, they didn't have to know of any, so they didn't know of any. And by the time I stumbled into this collection that represented 29 years, to be specific, one could round off at 30, but the point is 29 years of black artists sending artwork to this city from all over this country, some 900 artists, every year between 1942 and 1970. Major artists. Charles White, Elizabeth Catlett, you can go down the list. Bearden, of course, Woodruff was the one, Hale Woodruff was the one who launched it. I mean, Atlanta's sitting on a major treasure trove of this material, and it was in the basement. There was a gallery that Hale had put together, but it just became a big mission, and I ended up renovating the former library and relocating it and putting it into an illustrious environment that it really deserves. But I will say, and I'll put this on record, that one of the challenges that I perceive within the African American community is that it's really challenged to really understand its own value in culture. In other words, it has culture, but it can't seem to recognize it as having a real potency. And the potency comes from the it's both. It really, you have to be able to recognize it in order to even make it more potent. And that to me was always a challenge with the administration, the HBCUs. And I understand how it happened. I understand why it happens. But it becomes a real, it's a challenge. it remains a challenge unless you have people at the helm, people on the board of trustees side. I don't know who's looking at this film, but I'm speaking my piece right now. But without board of trustees who make the right decisions to bring in competent presidents, leadership, who are knowledgeable on a certain level of understanding the impact of culture on the students that they're trying to recruit. I don't, if I came into this life again, I'd probably be either on the board of trustees somewhere or president. Just so that I know that certain things can happen. But this happened in spite of, I mean, it was one president, Thomas Cole Jr., who really understood that. But if you don't get a president that really understands the impact of what they're sitting on, and it's multi-million-dollar value, and they're not looking at it as a cash cow to sell, that's not going to help in any way, because they don't have, So, yeah, that's another story. We won't go into that.
Wow.
But to say this really impacted my production, which I allowed. But some people handle it better. I mean, we got to make a living. You know how it is trying to make a living with art. But there are a lot of young artists doing it now, though, I must say.
Yeah. And can I ask if you have perhaps a preferred medium or?
Yeah, well, see there again. I am a multimedia artist. I was trained as a painter and sculptor. Before coming to Atlanta, I was carving limestone. And in fact, I sold a limestone piece in order to get here. And unfortunately, I sold another one that I could never get back. So, and I didn't, that's the part in terms of if I probably pursued a degree in sculpture, I probably would have all of that stuff. But anyway, long story short, textiles, some, only because I was teaching that stuff, painting, but as Joe Overstreet once said to me, he says, Tina, you're not an artist, you're a painter. Don't use the term artist, you're a painter, which means in the fine art realm, yeah, I see color, I see life, yeah. And when I'm actually working on something right now, which is interesting. And I'm doing it mainly because I got so frustrated with this academic, because I'm really not, I don't like that. I mean, I love research, but the whole process of scholarship and the detailing of it, that really wears on my brain. So I accepted this project just to make the switch in my brain so I could, and it is helping, even though it's two at the same time, so it's another story, yeah. So printmaking, I am doing printmaking. Right now, it's just easier to be able to manage, but I love color. I mean, I love engaging with the whole aspect of pigment. So, yeah.
Yeah. One of your works that we found online before coming was your Batik Chapunto. And I found it really interesting because it's really hard, repetitious processes to make things like that. And you do like printmaking as well as other kind of layered works. What influences your use of different mediums, especially these ones that are not as popular?
Well, first of all, I think the class that I was in sculpture in the sculpture studio wearing overalls for 4 years and all that. One of the classes I took that was not in that situation was Materials and Techniques by the famed illustrators, Caldecott Award illustrators, Tina, I'm having that moment, Diane and Leo Dillon, illustrators of Why the People Fly, or The People Could Fly, Why the Mosquitoes Buzz in My Ears. These are famous children's books that they illustrated. Anyway, they had a class that was so incredible. Every week we would come in and we had a different medium. They were medium specialists. And they would fill that blackboard with all these items we had to get every week. And we were trained to, and in fact we did polyurethane stained glass projects. One was a ceiling about the size of this living room at a gallery. And I just loved the idea when we had a whole new different medium, and that really opened my head up in terms of, for me right now, I want to work with whatever medium will get the message across. I mean, I love conceptual art. David Hammons probably sits out as my favorite artist. I mean, there are many. I mean, he's out of my generation, but there are many. There are many more. But I was totally inspired by his work and his thinking and his approach to art. But I mean, you know, be it cat-lit or I don't want to get involved in calling names because I get in big trouble right about now. And plus the fact I'm having a memory issue, rattling people off the top of my tongue. But yeah, so I'm looking forward to, I think what this project with Emory has done for me right now is that I think I'm ready for a big dose of being in the studio and doing nothing else.
I'm excited to see whatever comes of it.
All right.
I want to ask, you talked a little bit earlier about the National Geographic film. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I get this call from email from the National Geographic group, and they said, we've been green-lit to produce a story on the War of 1812 with, you know, your family's story being a component of it, because they were really looking at this flotilla, the American flotilla that went up against the British and lost in this moment where it enabled the British to head up to the capital to burn it. And so they were, Don, I'm talking my names, I wasn't ready to talk about this. I gotta look at his name. His name will come to me in a second. But, so they were marine archaeologists and marine historians who were involved in this production based on the research that they did in that area of the Chesapeake Bay around Tangier Island, that kind of thing. So what they did was they wanted to also fully contextualize what was going on relative to freedom seekers using that moment in time to make their escape as well. So that's how I was invited to contribute to that, and it was all shot in the region.
Wow.
Yeah, it was all shot in the region. They brought me up in August, and within the first 48 hours, I came down with COVID, and the team had to go home. They went back to England. There was a team here. The executive producer was in with his assistant from England, but the people shooting were from here. And so they had to go back, and then a month later, after I recovered, I went back up in September, and we shot all, around the rivers where it's still online. I don't know if you haven't seen it.
What's it called? Do you know?
Oh, Okay, so it's part of Drain the Ocean series. Okay, Drain the Ocean series, and I'm going to give you the number 65. Well, you're writing it down. So I'm giving you number 65, meaning season 6, episode 5 of Drain the Oceans. And it's in the National Geographic series, but you can also access it through Prime Video. So you can go through Prime and put it, I think, for $1.99, $2.99 if you want high definition. I never could tell the big difference, but I'm sure there is. And you can watch it there, and it's, it's. I mean, I still, in my mind, I don't understand how all this is happening, but it's happening, and
wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It's amazing.
I wanted to also ask about. So you were able to kind of recollect and collect and learn about your family's history. How do you feel, or do you wish to pass it on continually through your family as a legacy, or how do you share the story of the Americans?
Well, let me, well, to answer that question, yes, because I really want to get this, I want to get back to, this book we published for children, for young people, middle school. And when I did this, the interior, how books are usually white on the inside, but I wanted this cover because when I went to the archives in London, the cover of those musters that all those names are in, this is what they look like. They look like this, and I wanted to make sure that the paper gave off that feeling in terms of time. But my point is that there's so much. I mean, you see what we're up against when you look at what's happening in the state governments, and they're trying to go back to enslavement. No, you're going to be penalized if you learn how to read or you know your history. You're going to be penalized, and so it's ever more important for us to publish these things and make them available online and in hard copy. I'm a hard copy person because to me, I don't understand what this stuff is. It's in the cloud. Who knows when that cloud is going to blow up? I don't know. But I want a hard copy of this. It can be both, but definitely hard copy. And so relative to passing it on to my family, listen, my position is that it's my people that have gone to glory that are making this happen. What I got to tell you, can I tell them this story? I got to tell them this. So now listen. So here I am, I'm registering. This is what I mean. I registered for this conference on the War of 1812. Whatever they were doing in 2012 to 2013. I registered on my computer here. And they say, well, what do you want on your name plate? And I'm saying to myself, well, I'm Tina Dunkley. I says, okay. And then I decide, I'm just going to put this in here. I didn't even think the typing thing was going to accept what I wanted to put in it. But it did, and I put descendant of British Royal Navy Colonial Marine Sergeant Ezekiel Loney. Now I'm thinking, that's not going to fit, and they're not going to be able to put that on here, and that's no problem, but I wanted to still let them know who was coming. I get there, and bam, they got it on the tag. And I'm wearing it, and I'm just like, wow. 8 o'clock in the morning, we're waiting for the shuttle to take us to the place for the sessions. In walks this gentleman, and I'm with my brother, and it's just the three of us in this little vestibule of a hotel. And he looks down, this gentleman looks down at this, and he says, oh my, I got a book coming out in September, and your ancestors in it.
Wow.
And I'm saying, that's not possible. That's not possible. This is a 200-year-old name buried in a... He said, I know where it is. It's going to be in my book. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I said to my brother, so you're the physicist, do the math on that. Mm-hmm. How could this be? How could this happen? The book comes out in September. We go to the release. Here it's falling apart, which I'm really ashamed of, but this because I've been handling it so much. Here he is, Alan Taylor. It wins the Pulitzer Prize.
Wow.
Why does it win the Pulitzer Prize? Because he took the time to really understand and put names to all these freedom seekers in that war, in that time. He really took the time to put names to those human beings and to tell full stories based on the letters that were being exchanged among the plantation owners. He got it right. And as it turns out, I said, well, I know, when I said this to him in this exchange, I said, well, the book isn't about him, is it? He says, no. He says, but he told me that as the foremost authority on colonial America, he never knew what the roles were of African Americans in the wars, both in the first Revolutionary War and the second one, which is often considered the War of 1812. So he wanted to look at what happened there. So he chose Virginia because they lost the most amount of slaves. And then come to find out, the reason why they lost the amount that they did my ancestor was pivotal in that return and going back and getting 66 from that particular plantation. The rest of them may have lost anywhere from 1 to 5, but they lost 69.
Wow.
So, is that history? And this is all before Harriet Tubman is born?
Yeah.
Wow.
That's something.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That is such a wild serendipity as well that you would be running into.
Well, to the point that I really firmly believe that there's consciousness well beyond what we're talking about here. There's no reason, I didn't know any of these people. They didn't know me. Had I not had this on, I would have never known about that book. I would have never known about it. He didn't go there to talk about that book. He was the keynote address speaker, turns out. I didn't know that either, but he wasn't speaking specifically on this book. It hadn't come out yet. But and I'm just citing one. But for me, this entire journey, I've had, this is just one of them. This is just one of the things that makes me know there's consciousness on the other side.
So,
Ergo, the practice of ancestral worship in the indigenous world.
that's true. So Taylor's book, The Internal Enemy, shares the name with your recent exhibition.
For sure. Yeah, because the internal enemy, the term itself comes from the plantation owners who realized in that moment that while they were fighting this external enemy as being the British, that here they are sitting in a situation with people around them who are really their internal enemy. You've got them, chained up, you have their minds already switched off, so they reckon, so it's in those exchanges that he's seeing that term, they're having discussions of what are they going to do about their internal enemy. They got this, So my position was that when I came for my exhibition, I wanted sanctuary, because that's what they were looking for, a place, for this. And the idea of doing this silhouette in this manner, where I've used the broadsides and whatnot of the, I can't stop that, right? I mean, it's going to stop. Okay. So, because I was wondering, photography had not been created, and so, but they had silhouettes that they used, and I was really interested in sort of creating something that reflected that. So that's how that. And bukusu in this book, by the way, this was really the first work I did. It's quite a bunch of confusion, really, but but I have all the statements written here. These are actual statements by the plantation owners about how these enslaved people were hiding underground, covering themselves with, quote, so much art that that they said even if you walked over them in the broad daylight, you would never know that they were there. So, there's a lot. There's a lot. And luta continua. Yeah.
So how did making this work kind of overlap with your findings of your family? How did it deepen your understandings? How did it change what you were thinking or feeling?
For me, I'm still processing. I feel, for instance, now I have a young cousin who initially when I met her, she was like, 3 years old, this little, very, small voice, very demure little girl, and now she's a junior at Vanderbilt in music, and she plays the trombone. That's her instrument, but she's much more involved now in composing. So she's in school and she's composing. She contacted me and said that she wanted to do a collaborative work with me in an exhibition where she's doing music about our family history. And so this really, I'm like, okay, this is an impact. Because now, I mean, I wanted to do another exhibition that wasn't so literal, too, because, you know, a lot of times in fine art, you want to be so literal, and I understand all of that, but my whole thing was that nobody knows this information. How could I not have some kind of little aspect and image for people to really grab onto? That was a big thing with me. So now that I have that, I can move on to, I'm not sure where I'm moving on to right now, but and there'll be some little aspect, you know, like for instance, that the actual proclamation that was circulated at that time, I think that I don't know what I'm going to do with that, but I'm going to do something with it, you know, because, and there were 1,000 of them, so I don't know. I mean, I might have it in a box with blowing it, you know, I don't know, but I find that fascinating, you know, in terms of. You know, just how all of that, you know, I don't know how I'm going to do. It's going to be probably more conceptual at this stage of the game. But I'm looking forward to what she's, and I've heard her, she sent me some of her music, not related to this, but I'm interested. I'm interested in her sound. So, yeah, that's a biggie, because I don't know what that means. and if someone in the family is so moved to do that, oh, please, it's all, and she really, her great-great-grandfather is the brother of my grandmother. So they were siblings. And he was a musician. Now, and this is how this thing sort of rolls out in a certain way, because I'm not so sure. She may be aware that he was a musician, but that DNA gets encoded. And here she is, and she's composing. And so she's coming off that line of music, and I knew I had cousins who were musicians and whatnot. So she's like, well, wait a minute, let's do this. And I'm like, wow. And what's so funny to me about her is that she's a, you know, grown young lady, and she still has that little voice. She talks like this, but her sound, you know, so I'm really excited about that. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. So on getting to share those connections and kind of share these stories and these resources with people, were there any people who came through your exhibit and it led to any connections or conversations or new findings, or anyone who reached out to you after attending your exhibit?
I think the answer is yes, but I have to remember in this moment as you're asking me, because the people that are really that have really been coming after me are the Americans themselves, because a lot of people don't have this, okay, and a lot of people are not aware that, you know, this document exists, and therefore they come. And he's deceased now, and I've really, to me, his collection, I don't know what they're doing there. That worries me a lot, because that man did so much research. I mean, he's got life dates and these people, and so those are the people to me that have reached out, and family. I'm sure people who are related to me, you know, to us in a certain way, but and I'm probably not remembering something that I should remember right now, but I'm just having that moment. Yeah. Yeah. Because COVID hit right behind that. So that's the other thing, that everything sort of went into a very stagnant stage, And that's when I picked up on this project, and which was really, and I wasn't producing any work, fine artwork. I did some other things, but I wasn't producing any artwork, and because I had just come off of an exhibition, and a lot of times it was downtime for me, but I'm ready to go up now. So.
Awesome. So with Sanctuary, I can see how you've brought a lot of history and emotion to the visual, I guess, realm. And I'm assuming your next exhibition with your cousin will include more like sonics and more sound.
Right. I mean, I don't know where she's going to take that. And it's interesting that you say that because I really wanted to. I mean, I hear things, and I haven't told what I mean. Like, I hear, well, first of all, I hear cannons.
Yeah.
And what the texture of the sounds are coming off of water.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I don't know how she's, I haven't talked about it. She went up for it. In fact, I need to call her in this week because she went up to Tennessee somewhere for a conservatory on composition. So she did something this summer relating to her field. And we do need to spend time together before she goes, and I'm getting ready to go too. So, in fact, we really should be going to John Dowell's exhibition in South Carolina because John Dowell he's a printmaker, photographer, turned photographer who has done an installation about his family that has a sound board, soundtrack, or what have you, that's at this South Carolinian McKinsick Museum? McKinsick, I think so, McKinney or McKinsick, I think, museum, and I wanted to see that. And actually, I would really like to go with her. But she's coming back as I'm trying to leave. So we got a real problem, actually. I think she comes back on the 16th, and I'm leaving on the 15th. But I need to make sure I see that exhibition before it closes either way. And I think I put that note out to her. So, because he's done something on that order about his family, and I don't know who did his soundtrack, but he's done stuff with music before, collaboration. So I was really looking to him for, however it is we're going to go, we'll get it done.
Well, I think that's all from us for questions, in terms of questions.
Okay.
Is there anything else you want to say about the Americans? Or actually, no, sorry, one more question. Last question.
That's okay. Listen, I'm here.
So, Ezekiel Loney, Major Sergeant, you say? Ezekiel Loney, or Sergeant Ezekiel Loney?
Right, Sergeant Ezekiel Loney,
okay.
Correct.
What would you like to say to him if you could speak with him?
Ooh. That's a great question. Well, that piece, there's a piece over there, and it's in the book. You see that number 44 on that gentleman? This is when we were on Tangier Island with the family. And we had made origami boats and put the number 44 on them. And had the children, we folded them up and then we sent them out on the waterways as a tribute and honoring him or what have you. And at that little gathering there with my family, I said after that, I says, I don't know if you all even know that we're here to honor you, remember your story. But if there's any way for you to let us know that you do know that we're here. I don't know what that's going to look like. 30 minutes later, we're in a golf cart. And this young man is walking, we're approaching him from the back. And he's got that 44 is that large on his t-shirt. I didn't even ask him what the t-shirt, why did he have 44 on the back of his t-shirt as large as that? That is an accurate size. And it was purple. And I said, when I stopped him, we were driving up, because you can only use those carts on that island is real small. So I stop him and I tell him, I says, wow. And I tell him why we're there. And he says, wow, that's an incredible story. That's why you're here. Yeah. He says, well, did you tell the mayor? I said, the mayor? You got a mayor of this place? Yeah, there he is. He was sitting, the mayor was like right over there, sitting on a motorcycle. Nobody looks official. And I went over and I told the mayor, but he said, wow, that's why you're here. He said, well, did they take you over to Tangier Island? I mean, to Fort Albion is really where it felt, Fort Albion. And I said, well, they say it's kind of underwater. It's been claimed by the ocean. And he says, yeah, that's true. He says, but there's still parts of it you can walk on with it. He says, well, how many you got in your family? He said, well, meet me here at 6:30 and I'll take you over in my boat. Okay. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We're on an island. We've never been to the island before. Who's wearing a t-shirt with number 44 on it at the moment? So to answer your question, first of all, I'd like to know from him, how does it look from your side right about now? What more can I do? What more can we do to spread the story? But not just spread the story and have it impact upon people, families, the young ones. I'm really interested in that. I don't have any children. But that's why I was really glad to hear this young girl, this cousin of mine, who's, he said, well, we got to do something in it. And I have other, my niece. I had a grandniece here last week, 2 weeks ago, and she's alert. She's in 15, a reader. She's reading all the time. Period. Getting up in the morning, going through, she's putting down 2-3 books a week. So she's covered. I know she's listening to me. She's just picking it up. Osmosis is what's happening to her right about here. Then I got another one who's at Howard. She's a niece, grandniece at Howard in the architectural program. And so she's in her junior year. I think she's going into her junior year now. And her grandfather told me that she has her first, apparently this is her first summer working a 9-to-5, 40-hour gig. And it's real, she's tuning into the real world right about now. So yeah. With a construction company, so yeah. So that's what I would want to know from him. I'm always open to, if he's got some messages, I'm really open. I want to hear him, I want to feel him, and I want to know. No, this is what I want to know. So I got to remember half the thing. This is what I want to know. He probably already knows this, but this is what's gnawing at me. I want to know from whence he came on that plantation. I want to know if he was on that plantation at 2 years old. I want to know who was influenced him psychologically to understand that he was going to make this move at 23 years old or what have you. That's what I want to know. I want to know who. Was there someone? Because he obviously was able to have some kind of clear identity and vision for himself and his family. And I really want to understand what's behind that. And I've been actually trying to find because see, they had their surnames on that plantation. And where those people, I've been trying to figure out where they got those people, and that hasn't been an easy, I don't know if they're holding information. I've been trying to figure out what's going on, because I heard mention that these people had a thing about bringing in children, but I don't know where they would have, I mean, people are selling folks, you never know. But I am really interested in that. And I should tell you that I did do the DNA on the Loneys, the Y chromosome Loneys. And it came back 100% Balanta of the Guinea-Bissau. 100% Balanta. That's because a lot of times there's always these mixtures. They came back 100% Balanta.
Wow.
And I did that because the gentleman, John Weiss, Jewish Brit, told me that he surmised that he was biracial, which really could have been true. And from that statement, I really wanted to know. So I Y chromosome on the cousins, and they came back and they wrote 100% Balanta, and it turns out the Balanta of one of the early groups that were the Portuguese attempted to enslave were listed and high on the list of being very difficult to enslave. Could be a DNA issue.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
Wow. I think that will be it for us today.
All right.
Thank you so much for your time. The last thing we're going to have you do
All right.
is sign this.
Oh, yeah. Get the sign up.